instead of you taking the roll, Mrs. Bass, let the record reflect that there are 6 board members here. Mrs. McQuinn is absent for the rest of the day. Dr. Fenoy?
Yes, at this time, I'd like to turn over our next budget workshop to Mike Berg and Heather Knust.
Yes, good afternoon. Today's budget workshop, the purpose of this workshop was to really follow up on a discussion and a presentation we had on May 8th. I want to just take the board back a little bit. We've been working at the budget for a while now. You actually had your first workshop on December 5th when we looked at the outlook for the upcoming school year, established priorities, and then we went to work with your budget advisory committee. We had a key budget workshop on February 6th where we brought to the board really the recommendations that impacted our school centers. And it was significant this year, more so than past years, because we had the referendum dollars to work with. So we were doing a lot of good things for security, mental health, teacher retention supplements. And once we've been pushing each year to get school budgets out earlier. That helps principals recruit the top talent available. So we had school budgets out to them on February 21st, which is the lion's share of our budget. We then went to work on our department budgets. The superintendent dedicated 3 days of his time to meet with every individual department head and review their budget and go evaluate any requests they had. On May 8th, we brought to you the items that made it past that review and that were being recommended. We had spent some time with your budget advisory committee going through those, but we fielded some questions on May 8th, and we just, the board made the request that we kind of take a step back, allow some more time for that review, and then come back here today to kind of wrap it up. Just looking out ahead on the budget timeline, we are working towards a tentative budget adoption on July 31st. We will have another budget workshop expected on July 24th to take you through some changes to the capital budget for the next, both our 5 and 10 year plan. We had some good news lately with the impact fees, and we got a little flexibility out of Tallahassee on how we can spend our capital dollars, so we're incorporating some changes there that we'll bring back to you. But today is really to pick up kind of where we left off on May 8th. I do want to share we got some recent data on the national, the national education statistics and where Florida ranks. And you may recall we were 44th previously. Florida did fall to 45th in the country. And we predicted this because of the insistence on the legislature to roll back school taxes. And the latest data available is actually FY17. So we could very well see Florida fall further in the next couple of years as this data becomes available. At 45th in the country, we trail the national average by $3,125 per student. Just to gauge the significance of that, if Florida were to advance to the mid-range and be at the midpoint and be in the 25 seat or so, that would generate over $531 million a year for our operating budget, which is huge, right? Our entire operating budget is $2.1 billion now, so $500 million is a significant amount. So I just want to keep the public, keep putting this in front of people, because it really speaks to the importance of the referendum that our community overwhelmingly supported, and why that is so critical. As I said, the general fund budget's $2.1 billion. 75% of that is budgeted directly in our schools, and that includes not just our schools but the charter schools, and then also those referendum dollars that are going directly to our schools. So 75% right in school budgets. You've got 8% of our budget into departments to support departments, which is really, that's fairly lean if you look at other districts across the country. And then if you dig into departments, that includes transportation, and transportation is a significant expense, about $50 million a year, and roughly, a third of that could be attributed to transportation. So that's the big budget picture. Before I hand this over to Ms. Knust, I do want to share some good news and give Ms. Knust and her team some credit. Many years ago, when I first started in district, I was able to apply for an award from the Government Finance Officers Association on the budget book itself, right? And that's when we started developing a more comprehensive document. And to get that award, you had to check off certain criteria that you included, different forecasts and analysis and different pieces of information. And that was a good achievement at the time. The GFOA has really taken it a step further in recent years, and they now, to apply or to qualify for an award, what they call the best practices in school budgeting, you have to show your whole budget process from start to finish and how you use the budget to support the strategic plan. You know, how do you work with the community and your oversight committee? And Ms. Knust had to compile about 800 pages worth of documentation, improve our budget book even further, and then also really utilize a lot of the good work that was done by on the academic side and the superintendent with the strategic plan and how all this ties together. And we recently received that award. We were one of the 8, there's only 8 districts in the country that have received this award, and we're the first in Florida. So that was a pretty significant achievement, and I just wanted to give Ms. Knust some credit. And good way to start the meeting. So.
Well, I have to thank my department for preparing that 800 pages of supporting documentation that was submitted, and also Mr. Oswald for participating in the interview that we had to have to show that we are working collaboratively together. I also wanted to mention that we did have our last Budget Advisory Committee meeting yesterday on June 5th, and the Budget Advisory Committee was able to unanimously approve supporting the FY20 budget. And I was able to preview this presentation with them yesterday. So since our last meeting, we did talk about that our FY20 budget is $2.1 billion. We have had some minor changes since our last meeting. The preliminary tax roll came in on May 24th, and it came in a little lower than what was projected by the state. The final certification will be released July 1st, and we're still hopeful that we're going to go back up. But we did have a decrease in the revenue that we're expected to receive, approximately $1 million, and that reduces our per student funding down from 1.61% to 1.54%. And as a result of that decrease in per student funding, we also had to adjust the amount we set aside for employee salary bargaining reserve from the 16.1 million to the 15.4 to align with that decrease. We were also able to receive the actual FRS rates. And so originally we had projected a 0.25% increase in FRS. The actual was 0.21, so we're able to reduce the impact for FRS. And we also adjusted the state mandates to just reflect the impact for district schools, backing out the impact for charter schools. So if you were to compare this budget outlook to our last presentation on May 8th, you'll see that there was a slight decrease of that $1 million in our net revenue available of $44.3 million. And as I just discussed, we did have that decrease in FRS from 2.5 million to 2.1. Also, the reduction in the categoricals to reflect just the district portion. And with the decrease in revenue, there was also a slight decrease in the contingency in order to maintain that compliance of the 3%, which is board policy. And that 1.6 million really relates to the FEFP, increase in FEFP revenue. There was no change to the annualized salary settlements or the projection of the additional staff that are needed. And then also, here's where you'll see the decrease in the employee salary bargaining reserve. It was 16.1 million. It's been reduced to 15.4. And we're going to go into a little more detail into the school-based investments as well as the department-based investments. We're going to really walk through each piece of the pie that was on that previous slide. And we had also talked about in the last meeting the realignments and estimated savings, and those were realized through a reduction in the worker comp rate as well as a reduction in the use of the contracted police services. So our budget is actually balanced, and we do have a slight surplus. That's including the reduction in the preliminary tax roll, and we are hopeful that we will see an increase in that tax roll come July 1st. So we're going to start with that first piece of the pie, which is the schools. The schools are the largest piece of the school district budget. That process really starts in the fall, and school budgets are built based on projected enrollment. So projected enrollment is a real driver in our budget. We release school budgets on February 20th. We had some just minor changes within the school allocation. We made some changes within ELL. We invested over approximately $2 million, which was funded through realignments and changes within the ELL allocation. So we added 14 teachers, 6 community language facilitators, and also some additional coordinators. Additional investments in schools include a testing coordinator at each high school, as well as extra duty days for data processors and ESC contacts to provide additional supports during the summer months at the school sites. We also increased the non-salary allocation for fine arts, and this is the first time that we've had an increase in this supply budget in probably close to 20 years. So the total investments at the school sites is $5 million, and keep in mind this does not include the referendums and referendum initiatives, and if we offset that against the $2 million in realignments within ELL, it's around $3 million net impact. So now we're going to move on to the next piece of the pie, which is the referendum. So with the referendum, we're going to be generating a little over $200 million. We're investing $20 million in mental health initiatives, adding 1 position at each school site, as well as additional extra duty days, school psychologists, and expanding our co-located services for mental health. We're investing additional $20 million in security. We're adding approximately 110 officers, as well as additional support staff, supplies, and equipment. And we're able to continue to fund police aides and monitors and add additional funding at secondary schools for after-school events. We're able to continue to fund over 700 elementary art, music, and PE teachers, Choice and Career Academy. And we also added 2 teachers on special assignment to expand and support the fine arts curriculum. Over $100 million of the referendum funds is for teacher recruitment and retention supplements. And the teachers will see that first payment on their August 23rd paycheck. So the third piece of the pie is charter schools. So the charter school allocation, again, is just like our school budget allocation. It's driven by enrollment. We have to project what we think the projected enrollment for charter schools is going to be. It looks like there's going to be 4 new charter schools opening next year. There's always the potential that there could be some closures as well. But we're starting to see, the big blue bar is enrollment at district schools. The smaller gray bar is enrollment at charter schools. And you can see that our enrollment is starting to really level off at this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so that's not just a Palm Beach phenomenon. The state of Florida, as the student enrollment has kind of tapered off, and Miami-Dade and Broward actually experienced declining enrollment. This past school year, we were projected by the state to grow by about 2,000 students, and at the end of the school year here, our actual growth was less than 100 students. And next year, we're projected to grow by about 700 students, and we'll have to really we can't take that for granted based on what happened this year. We're just going to have to watch enrollment really closely, and that has a direct impact on our revenue. We've been fortunate the past 4 or 5 years. We've been growing, and when you're growing and adding enrollment and able to serve students and utilize some of the existing personnel to do that, that generates some economies of scale and additional money to work with. So we're really keeping an eye on this, because if we start to see our enrollment decline, that could create some additional challenges with the budget.
So the next piece of the budget is related to department budget. That piece of the pie is about 8%. Transportation alone makes up approximately 30% of the total department budgets. Department budgets are built very differently than school budgets. Department heads are required to go through a line item review every year, and they do sit down, as Mr. Burke had mentioned, with Dr. Fenoy and a one-on-one presentation, and it takes place over a 3-day period. So we finalized those presentations in February, and we presented those results at the last board workshop. And at that last meeting, the board recommended that we break out those changes by division, that it was easier than looking at it by our strategic plan initiatives. And so that's what you'll see today. And I know that you've we also provided that earlier as well. So we're going to start with the board direct reports. So the total changes within the board direct reports within the Inspector General is $245,000. Only minor changes since the last meeting. The General Counsel has changes of $224,000. So total changes within the board direct reports of $469,000. Next, we're moving on to the divisions within the district. So the deputy superintendent has total changes of $365,000, but that's offset against realignments within his division. He was able to eliminate part-time and system, which offsets at least one of the instructional specialist positions, as well as additional non-salary. So the net impact is $245,000. So within the chief of human resources, the total changes are $601,000, offset against realignments within that division of eliminating a director position. So the director position that's being added is really being offset against a director position that was eliminated of $120,000. So the net impact is $481,000. The chief operating officer has a total changes of $672,000. With offset by some realignments within non-salary of $16,000, total changes of $655,000. A majority of these changes are really non-salary related, uniforms for custodians for security purposes, as well as increase contract services related to infectious diseases. Within the chief of staff, you can see that there were some changes within this division since the last meeting. There was a reduction, and so the total changes is $58,000. And within the CFO division, a total increase of $31,000, primarily related to just annual software increases. So the total department budget changes for divisions totals $1.7 million, offset by realignments of $257,000 for a net impact of $1.4 million. But once you also offset that against the savings within the worker comp rate and also the reduction within the contracted police services, there is no net impact for these changes. So the next piece of the pie is the non-K-12 program budgets. Those program budgets, or the non-K-12 activities, are revenue generating and self-sustaining. So we have our after-school program, adult and community ed, a voluntary pre-K, and then miscellaneous donations that come in to support the school sites. And we keep those separate from the regular budget since they are self-sustaining and those funds carry over for that specific purpose. The next piece of the budget is the school and county-wide costs. The school costs, and it seems like a large amount of $40 million, but that's just really a holding account until we can wait, and we have to finalize and close out the current fiscal year. And once we finalize and close out the current fiscal year, we can allocate the costs back to the school sites. So it includes items like APIB and ACE testing, funds that we have to have set aside for the schools, but until we close out the year, we don't have the amount that we can allocate to the schools. So this is really just a holding place until we finalize and close out the school year, as well as for new categoricals like the turnaround program in the low 300. We keep it here as a holding place until we actually have the schools that qualify. Once we have those schools, we allocate those funds out. And then the countywide costs, those are items that can't be associated with any one department that are paid out centrally. We also have capital maintenance transfer. It's approximately $100 million. And there's a transfer that's made from the capital projects fund to the general fund to pay for eligible capital-related costs, like property and flood and other capital-related items that don't qualify to be within the capital projects fund. And then other remaining components, we have utilities. We expect that to remain relatively consistent with the current year. It's $49 million. Employee leave payouts, we expect that to remain relatively consistent with the current year, which is at $17 million. And the board contingency reserve will be increasing to $64 million to comply with board policy to maintain 3% of total appropriations. So as a result of the referendum, we've been able to make some big investments this year. We've invested over $100 million in the teacher recruitment and retention supplements. We've put a lot into security and mental health initiatives. And we were able to set aside a salary reserve of $15.4 million. And that's really related to the increase in the BSA that we had in the FVFP. And we still have to wait for enrollment. You know, there are still a lot of variables out there that can impact the budget that we're going to make sure to keep watching. I already talked about that they release a preliminary tax roll. The final tax roll will be out on July 1st. And then we have to watch enrollment and see where it actually comes in, starting at the beginning of the school year, and we monitor that throughout the year.
I just want to mention, so I know with the salary reserve at 15.4 million, you know, that's that's not meeting everyone's expectations. And as we work to finalize the budget, any dollars that we can free up through either closing the books on FY19 or with the tax roll, that's where we'll be directing any dollars we can come up with to try to bolster that reserve, and we'll report back to you on our success with that in July. And
so with the budget development timeline, there is one minor change. The Budget Advisory Committee, since they were able to approve and support the budget in our last meeting, we did cancel the meeting that was scheduled on June 13th. So they did have their final meeting on June 4th. And then you'll be approving the advertisements for budget adoption on July 24th. Tentative budget adoption is on July 31st, and that's when the chair of the Budget Advisory Committee will be presenting the report of the Budget Advisory Committee. So you'll have that on July 31st, and final budget adoption is on September 4th.
Ms. Brill and Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, and thank you. This is very comprehensive and very helpful. But this is really for the superintendent, and I'm not looking at our direct reports, but you know, when I look at the increases in the superintendent's chiefs and the deputy, and I'm not saying I'm against it, but there's an increase of almost $1.5 million in their budgets. That's causing me to pause. I'd like to know, and I'm not expecting an answer now, but if you would please let us know what the trend is in the ESE department, multicultural department, transportation department, and other departments in the district. Are we asking them to cut their budgets? Are we increasing their budgets? Because 1.5 million seems like a lot, and I, did meet with people. I'm fine with our direct reports, my meetings with them, but I just need to know what those other departments look like, and if we are asking them to make cuts as we increase those departments.
Mr. Burke, you can respond to that.
Yeah, just real quick. No, we did not require any reductions from the departments you mentioned, or this wasn't a year where we went in, and we've had those years where we go in and try to make a 5% or 10% cut. We did not do that. These are the growth items that basically made it through the vetting process. And as Ms. Knust mentioned, you're absolutely right. It's putting $1.5 million more into these departments. We were able to offset some of that. This year, we paid a premium on the school police overtime when we contracted out for the cities to cover some schools as we've staffed up. So we feel like we're going to save money next year that we've now have 80 officers that we've hired. And so we're tapping some of those savings basically to say that would cover these increases. Just as a follow-up,
if you could they'll come back. I don't need a whole breakdown, but I'd like to see the trend, from last year to this year for those departments, for the service departments also, just to see, what the increase is before I approve the budget.
That's no problem. We'll put that analysis together, get it to the board.
Mr. Shaw.
This is not something that I think that we need tonight, but at some point, can we get an update on how the hiring's going on the school-based mental health counselors?
Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. I was just thinking about, what was that, a couple years ago, 3 years ago, when we did our evaluation to find out the balance between administrative versus instructional. Remember that? Can you tell us what that change has become now with these new, just as you guys are working forward with that shift? Because it looks like we're going to go higher on the percentage of administration, and I just want to make sure we're staying within what is like the national norm of that. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah, ERS had been in, and that was one of the first things they looked at was how did we compare with, like, were we top-heavy administrative cost? And I believe we're still in line with, they had a sample, they had some other districts that were comparable to us, and we compared pretty favorable back then. We'll estimate what this will do and how that may change.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and this is definitely laid out very well, and I appreciate meeting with everybody. Just a few points, and maybe these are small dollars, but first thing I'd like to say is for the Broad piece, we did talk a lot at the last meeting about that, and it was clearly explained, but I would like to see us get a profile. Since we've been doing Broad here in Palm Beach County for the last few years, I'd like to get a profile of how we're doing with that. How many have we had over the last 3 to 5 years? Have we been able to keep these people once we pay 2/3 of their salary? Are they leaving us? Some kind of a data sheet to tell me if this is worth it, since I see a lot of the departments and the direct reports are asking for it. So we do need to have some history as to where we are with that. I was checking in some of the other big 8 districts, and they don't have as many Broads as we have. But if I get that sheet, I can kind of tell how we're looking and why we're using it, and is it going to help us in the long run. And then as I looked at this on the travel, the increase in travel, professional development, which I know is very important for us to learn and grow, I'd like to know, how did we do last year as to when we were asking for some additional money? How much did we have in those buckets last year? If we're asking for $1,000 more dollars or $2,000 more dollars this year, how much did we have last year? That would be helpful for me to know that, maybe we're doing more or maybe we don't need any more. So that's something I would like to look at. And then I would like to say that I'd like to see those less buckets on here as for saying we're cutting something, because I see we're asking for a whole lot more. And I looked at this and I thought about the alternative schools. I've spoken to Dr. Fanoy as well as Mr. Oswald. I had a chance to visit the alternative schools in the district this year. And I know we say we're giving to schools, but I just really would like to know how we're really working to get them what they need. When I visited this year, I noticed that especially our intensive South school, we needed more in the police area for safety. I was there at that time. But then as I talked to all those principals and I spoke to Mr. Oswald about it, I don't know if we package that so that we can make sure we take care of our neediest children. I think we have them lumped into all the schools are getting this. I think it needs to be laid out to me as a board member as to how we're really staffing those schools. Are they getting what they need to work with our most neediest children? And certainly I know the facilities need a whole lot of upkeep, but what I found out in talking with the principals and others at those buildings is that there's a lot to be desired and more is needed. So in this budget piece, could somebody kind of give me a little profile of what we looked like last year, what we look like this year, and if we're getting those improvements, especially for alternative ed? Thank you.
Dr. Robinson?
Okay, thank you. So, yes, and I actually have a discussion item on alternative ed, so we can dig into that a little bit more. In terms of the Broad people, I would like to add to that analysis, what projects have they done? Because I mean, I could tell you I fully support bringing on these young, fresh, analytical minds. So, but just so that the board is clear, show us what projects they've done. In terms of the trend analysis, I would also like to see the past 5 years of the budget for the Office of African American, Latino, and Gender Studies. And I think, and demarcate on that, if you would, please, when we added Latino and Gender Studies to the office. Because I think that was part of multicultural at one point. Okay, now I have a lot of other things that I want to be addressed later. So one is if there's a thought on why the tax rolls decrease and how that impacts the referendum dollars. The next one is, now I have to say about these, what's now called the behavioral health professionals, that I used to call the MTSS, and I was promised one in every school. And I know we've got these multiple layers of people now. I'm going to work with Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield But I just need to make sure that we don't, I don't disproportionately staff with people who are there to treat as opposed to people who are there to triage and meet the child where they are, right? And address their immediate needs. I don't want us to develop a system of diagnosis and treatment and referral out and pathologizing children. Because I know that that is not our intent, but I'm concerned. I know we have some things that are mandated by law. I understand that. But we need to make sure we are counterbalancing with having the folks who are closest to the children in terms of culturally, socially, understanding who they are and not pathologizing, but understanding that, something happened to Johnny and we need to address that without diagnosing, right? Okay. The middle school after-school programs, can you just tell me, how is that funded? Is that funded through operating dollars?
Yes, we, that initiated with Safe Schools dollars. Now we're utilizing all our Safe Schools really for school police, but yeah, it's the general fund is supporting that. It's not a fee-based program.
Okay, so I could just tell you that this is one of the areas, this is going to be the next thing I harp on repeatedly, okay? So this is going to be my new MTSS. I'm just going to warn you, right? Because I think that children should be in extended after-school programs to expand their horizons. Those who can't go off to camp in the Northeast during the summer especially need to have after-school programs where they get exposed to robotics and chess and the arts, so forth. So I want us to, as we move forward, to see how we might be able to do that, whether it's partnerships, grants, whatever. But like by hook or by crook, we have to make sure we have these programs for children. On page 25, at least according to my notes, the value adjustment board costs us money. That's what it looked like to me. Am I misunderstanding?
Yes, there is a cost to operating the Value Adjustment Board, and so after that process is completed, the county splits out the cost, and they send us an invoice, and we have to reimburse our portion. So it's around $200,000.
Okay, and so on go forward, can you give us a report later? This is not urgent at all, but I'm just curious to know how often the actions of the Value Adjustment Board decrease the money coming to the schools. Because as I understand the process, this is people who are challenging their,
Yes.
whatever the
Right. Yeah, Ms. Canoe spoke to the administrative costs of that whole
Okay.
process, but there's another impact. If people are successful and they get their values reduced, then
Right.
yeah, it reduces our revenue. I think in Palm Beach County, we're pretty fortunate. It hasn't been a big problem for us. I know in Miami-Dade, it was a major issue where they were seeing their tax revenue significantly impacted by the actions of the Value Adjustment Board.
Okay, well, that's good. If you would just provide some numbers.
But yeah, we'll try to work on that.
Okay, in terms of school supports, I hope that we are stabilizing the school supports, and that's reflected in the budget. Because before, we used to go from this additional supports for the low 300, then when the list of that schools changed and we took away those supports and gave them to these schools, and it was just a destabilizing effect. So I would not now just explain to us later, and maybe it comes from Mr. Oswald, Dr. Sheffield, or whoever, but how we are no longer doing that.
The states helped a little, just real quick, the states helped with that as well because now they measure it over a 3-year average rather than just a single year. So
Okay.
that itself stabilizes it, but then we'll work with Mr. Oswald on the rest as far as what we do locally.
Okay, great, thank you. Then the other thing is the changes recommended for ELL. It does, and again, this is, you can respond later. Does that align with recommendations from ERS or any other outside agency? Because I have a vague recollection. You don't have to answer, but just
Yep,
send
Yes,
it
it
to us.
does.
in a-
You're correct.
Yes, it
Okay.
We had 2 takeaways, ELL and ESE from ERS,
Okay.
really, and we've been working on that.
Okay, and then the fine arts allocation, I'm really, really, really happy to see us putting some money into the arts like this. But I don't understand 2 teachers for fine arts curriculum and why that's necessary, and that can be a follow-up from our deputy or CAO too. But I'm thrilled to see it. I just don't quite understand the need for 2 teachers for the curriculum writing. So in terms of the boards people, I am now settled with the 3 additional positions for the OIG, in case anybody cared. But I'm still uncomfortable with the 2 attorneys. I'm not settled there yet, and I'll have to spend some more time with Ms. Rico before we have our first reading of the budget. The manager for equity and access, I still think should be higher on the food chain. I will fight that fight in a different area. And the other thing I would like for us to look at on a go forward is a focus on hiring police aides. And that is not to take away from any sworn officers, but as a pathway to replenishing our forces as people retire. So maybe the police aides, we could bring the police aides on. It's a similar conversation as with the paraprofessionals and academic tutors, right? So we bring folks on, get to see them, they can see the real work, and then maybe we can help support police aides to go to the academy. Then we have our future police force. I just think that that's something we need to look at, so. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Robinson, in that particular vein, that process already exists.
Okay.
Even the previous chief started that. But to your point, I think we're looking to be more intentional
Exactly.
with that. And I think I've heard Chief Kitzrow and his team talk about even creating sort of academies in schools for our children to get into that work early that will then be, groomed by our own officers, then supported by the board to go to the police academy, and then to come back and return to work in our environment.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank those who gave me their org charts. I didn't get them from everybody, so I'll be making the rounds again since we're not finalizing anything today other than reviewing. But I was looking at the VPK in the countywide costs as well as the VPK up on page 24. So now, will this give us additional VPK sites with this additional money that we have, the 9.8, and then also part of that 41.4 million? The 41.4 million. Would that give us more sites now?
No, that's maintaining the current sites that we have.
So we need more. We need more money. Yes, okay, we need more. Okay, and let's see if I had anything else I wanted to say.
With the VPK, we really need the state to do more because with the dollars that you really have control over, it's dedicated for K through 12. So it's as much as it supports our mission and all that, we
I
have
was
limited.
thinking we were getting something when I saw those
Yeah.
numbers, but it's just the same. So that was very clear to me. And also, I was happy to see that we're doing something with the maintenance piece for the custodial piece. That was very exciting to me. But as I keep digging through this, I would like to have the org charts for each one of these groups. And some of you gave them to me and some of you didn't. So I am requesting those. Thank you. Oh, I just heard every board member wants them. Email them to everybody. Thank you.
I would just a couple questions. So for a long time, I've been hearing from our school psychologists that they don't have enough staffing, and I see we're adding 40 additional psychologists. Is that going to meet their needs? Because I've been told they're so far behind, they can't get a lot of the work done that they need to get. So is 40 enough to make sure that we cover everything we have to cover under MSD and everything else?
We also added additional time this summer, extra duty days for the psychologists with the idea that they could catch up on some of that paperwork and backlog, and so that the impact of the 40 positions would not be lost to that, and they'd actually be out there working with our students. I guess I can't answer the question as far as is that enough. I think it's a great start. We could be coming back with more requests in future years, but we were able to meet they felt like that was a good number to start with. You can only hire so many of those folks that are just the availability is limited as well, so.
But isn't there somebody in charge of that department that can tell you if
Yes,
40 is enough?
Yes, and we have a new assistant superintendent in charge of that department, so
So
they'd be the
by
expert.
by the next time, can you make sure that we check,
Sir.
you check with her and her or him? I forgot who that is.
Okay,
Okay. Okay. Mrs. East, I'm sorry. And then I see we have for 3 middle school counselors per 3 guidance counselors per middle school. Are we going to make sure those guidance counselors aren't just added to do bus duty and everything else? I mean, these are actually going to be guidance counselors?
so answer is yes, and just to elaborate a little bit more, one of the things we've done, because the referendum is so critical, and we just face so much scrutiny with everything we do for security and mental health, and we have developed, the principals were given a form that they have to sign and attest to that these resources will be used as intended, and we're treating it like a grant, right? So there's some requirements that we've spelled out what's expected. We've asked them to sign to assure us that's how the resources will be used, and we'll be working with Mr. Oswald and the regional superintendents to make sure that occurs.
Okay. Well, if the principals say they're doing it, I'll trust them on that one.
Okay.
With respect to art, I see, for years we've been hearing from the art teachers that they're not getting any money. They have to dip in their own pockets for supplies. So I saw we're providing $4,000 per middle and per high school. Who has the authority to spend? I mean, is that for the art teachers themselves, or how's that going to be? I just want to make sure everybody's treated fairly, and that the teachers that have been complaining for years are dipping their own pocket. They're going to have a chance to use that money instead of dipping in their own pocket. So, how's that going to work?
Well, it's actually part of that same form that I mentioned earlier. All these enhancements that we've provided this year, that they go to where they're intended. The mechanics of that, we do have to entrust our school principals that they'll manage their budget and allow those teachers access. We don't budget to like the teacher level, but I think it's been made clear to the schools that's the expectation. The reception from the principals when we rolled out the budget was they were thrilled to get the money. They recognized it as a need, so I don't really foresee a problem. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's. You're also going to see some more money in your capital budget recommendation to replace musical instruments. So I think we're doing a lot of good things to support the arts this year.
Okay.
So to Dr. Robinson's earlier question and to the chairman's questions around the arts, the 2 positions that were approved by me in the budget, one was an existing grant position that was going away. So right now, there's a gentleman by the name of Mr. Edric Rhodes, who's actually responsible for the arts for the entire district by himself. And so one of those positions was a position that were going away, so I agreed to give him that position back. And then one additional position, because we are seeing the expansion of fine arts programs across the district. So the team will be made up of someone who's in the arts field, in the music field, and the theater field. And so that team of 3 will now be responsible for making sure all these additional funds that we're allocating to schools are used in the appropriate manner. In some cases, they've already started digging into schools, especially in our low-income communities where they don't have choruses and bands, starting those programs. And a lot of our high schools, again, as a former musician, because I can't play right now, but the idea of replacing instruments was a big deal, because not just from the aesthetics, there's a medical reason why you need to replace some of these old instruments. So again, it's not perfect that we're not going to replace everything, but we think it's a good start. But Mr. Rose and his new team need to help manage all of this. And we think about contracts associated with flag lines and all the different. So again, I think Mr. Rose has done an amazing job now that I know who he is. But if we're going to continue to expand, the UB Kansas, all these different schools, we got to give the young man a team. And we actually came to, he came to Executive Cabinet about 9 months ago, 10 months ago. And we asked him to give us a comparison to other large districts, fine arts departments. I will say that we're still woefully very small, but this was just a baby step that we tried to take to make sure that he has the support to continue with the great things we see in our schools and expanding them.
So thank you for that explanation. And so, yes, I see it now, right? But I just want to stress the equity component of it, because there are so many children who do not have access to the arts in their private lives. And it is such an enriching area that I just want to make sure that we work with true intention to ensure that all of our children are exposed. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and maybe I heard this, but just to be clear, for the police aides for the elementary schools, is there a pot of money in here that I missed? For each elementary school right now, we just have a police officer.
No, we're not budgeting for an aide at every school.
So we still have that opening piece for the elementary. As I talked to Chief Kissero, he said he was working on getting that done. So there's no money here for elementary coverage.
No, there are some,
There's some, but not beyond
Yeah,
what
police aides, for someone to be
Just-
out there when people walk into an elementary school. Yes,
So there were,
Not the officer. I'm looking, the officer may be inside the school. At every middle and secondary school, you have someone out there actually supervising, checking the people before they go in. So I'm wondering, is there a pot of money for that at the elementary level?
there is not. What there is allocated, and what we actually did this year is we looked at schools that did not have a single point of entry, and we allocated a police aide so that to provide some additional supervision. So we have police aides out there, but they're not on a one-to-one ratio with our schools. Ms. Canusta, I don't know, do you have how many we do have budgeted out there?
I believe it's around 30. So I have to go back and check,
You've
but I
got a-
believe it's around 30
Right,
to
we've got
40
100, 109 elementary schools, so roughly a third.
Can we look at it? Because I do travel a lot, and I see sometimes it's wide open, so if we could check that.
Okay,
Dr.
we'll bring
Robinson?
that back.
So I think you just partially answered this, but because I'm certain every middle and high school doesn't have somebody there. And so I think I just need to fact check that.
Well, every secondary school has a school security monitor. And then also with the school police aides, almost all the high schools have a police aide, and select middle schools and elementary schools, based on the single point of entry, have a police aide. So we can give you a breakdown of which schools have
Okay.
aides and which ones have monitors to make it more clear by level, so that you can
Thank you.
easily see it.
We need to do that in a closed session. That shouldn't be distributed to the board because then it's public information, right? Okay. All right. So, Mr. Burke, as you probably remember, I'm vice chair of the Value Adjustment Board, so I'll get that information for you. I'll get it from the Value Adjustment Board attorney, so you won't have to put that
That'd
on
be
your...
a big help, thank you.
So I'll get that for you. And before I forget, because my memory is not any good anymore, so yesterday I met with the library, head of the Palm Beach County Library. I just want everybody to know that during the summer, our school district provides food at every one of the 17 branches of the library for lunches for our kids. So I'm not sure we publicize that enough to make sure that the children, especially children in areas where, their parents aren't home because they're working and these kids have nothing to eat at home, that they know that the local library will have lunch for them. So can we make sure, I'll give this to the clerk, can we make sure this gets on the website, the district website? Okay, all right, great. And if that's it on this workshop, we go to the next one. Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, sir. At this time, I turn it over to